He fought 1,000 battles, but human war stories left him speechless, as Captain Artis Crane's hand hovered over the attack command. In that crystallizing moment, he understood. His weapons could destroy cities, but not the human spirit. Against a species willing to die for beliefs, his perfect conquest record shattered. For the first time in millennia, the legendary warrior ordered retreat. The metallic sheen of Captain Artis Crane's green skin reflected the holographic displays that surrounded him on the command bridge of the Iron Dominion. His silver-bearded jaw clenched as he studied the newly identified star system. 6 battle scars, each earned in conflicts that had expanded the Vornax Empire's reach across hundreds of worlds, creased his face like badges of honor. "The Terran system," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 victories. "Primitive, but their nuclear capabilities suggest potential." Lieutenant Commander Selena Voss approached, her thin frame nearly shadowed by Crane's imposing stature. Her role, as both second-in-command and psychological advisor, made her insights invaluable during conquest missions. "Captain," she said quietly, "our preliminary cultural analysis indicates something unusual about these humans." Crane's laugh resonated across the bridge, causing several junior officers to straighten their postures. "Unusual? In 7 standard cycles, I've never encountered a civilization we couldn't subjugate. The pattern never changes. Voss." She handed him a datapad containing detailed reports of Earth's diplomatic reception protocols. "Perhaps, but their greeting ceremonies include something our analysts can't quite decipher. They call it honoring the fallen." Crane dismissed her concerns with a wave of his 6-fingered hand. "Cultural curiosities are irrelevant to conquest. Prepare the diplomatic envoy. As always, we'll offer them the chance to surrender before we demonstrate our superiority." "Yes, Captain," Voss replied, though her expression remained troubled. "The neutral asteroid station has been prepared for the initial meeting." As Voss departed, Crane turned his attention back to the holographic display of Earth. So small, so blue, so seemingly insignificant. Yet, something about Voss's warning lingered in his mind. In a career spanning 1,000 successful battles, he had learned that overlooking details could be dangerous. Still, confidence overpowered caution. 7 days, he murmured to himself. 7 days is all it takes to break any civilization. The neutral asteroid station orbited in the space between Mars and Earth, a diplomatic concession that Crane had reluctantly granted. Usually, first contacts occurred on Vornax vessels, a psychological tactic to emphasize dominance. But these humans had insisted on neutral ground, and intelligence suggested that accommodating this small request might facilitate a quicker surrender. Crane's shuttle docked with precision at the asteroid facility. As the airlock cycled, he adjusted his ceremonial armor, platinum plates overlaid with insignia denoting his countless victories. At his side, Voss wore the more subdued gray uniform of a psychological operations officer. "Remember," she whispered, "they've requested a shared meal before negotiations begin. This appears to be an important ritual for them." "Eating with prey," Crane muttered. "An unusual start to a conquest." The airlock opened to reveal a delegation of 5 humans standing in formation. Their attire, what Crane recognized as military dress uniforms, displayed various colored ribbons and medals across their chests. Their leader, a weathered human with silver hair not unlike Crane's own beard, stepped forward. "Captain Artis Crane," the human said. "I am Captain Morrison of Earth's United Defense Force. Welcome to this neutral ground." Crane performed the customary Vornax greeting, pressing his fist to his chest. "I receive your welcome, though I question its sincerity given the circumstances of our arrival." Captain Morrison's expression remained impassive. "Before we discuss the future of our worlds, we would be honored if you would join us in a ceremony we perform before all significant negotiations." Crane nodded, following protocol despite his impatience. The human led him and Voss into a chamber, where a long table had been prepared with foods from both worlds. But before they reached their seats, Morrison directed them to a side alcove, where flames burned in a peculiar arrangement. "This is our remembrance flame," Morrison explained. "Before we begin, we ask that you join us in the farewell handshake to honor those who have fallen in service to their people." Crane's brow furrowed. "Explain this ritual." "We remember those who gave their lives in battle," said Morrison, "so that their sacrifice continues to have meaning. It is our way of acknowledging that what we discuss here was purchased with blood." Voss leaned close to Crane's ear. "They honor death as glory," she whispered. "Not like any conquered species we've encountered." A flicker of unease passed through Crane, but he dismissed it. Diplomatic theatrics were common among species facing subjugation. He extended his hand as instructed, clasping Morrison's forearm in the human gesture of respect. "Now," said Morrison, "let us break bread together before we speak of our world's futures." The meal proceeded with formal exchanges about each culture's dietary preferences and base-level information about their respective star systems. Crane observed the humans carefully, noting their practiced composure. They behaved not like a species about to be conquered, but like equals at a negotiating table. As the meal concluded, Captain Morrison dabbed his lips with a cloth and leaned back in his chair. "Captain Crane, I understand your empire has conquered many worlds." 1,000 battles, Crane stated matter-of-factly. 1,000 victories. Morrison nodded slowly. "Impressive. We humans have a much shorter history of space travel, but a long history of warfare among ourselves. Perhaps you would indulge our cultural custom of exchanging war stories before formal negotiations." Crane glanced at Voss, who gave a subtle nod. According to their intelligence, this appeared to be a genuine tradition among Earth military officers. "Very well," Crane agreed, "though I doubt your planetary skirmishes will compare to interstellar conquest." Morrison smiled thinly. "Perhaps not in scale, but sometimes the smallest battles reveal the greatest truths about a species." He gestured to an older woman with stern features. "General Chen Li will begin with a story from our history." The woman nodded respectfully. "I will tell you of Stalingrad." For the next hour, General Li described in meticulous detail how human soldiers had fought in freezing conditions, surrendering ground inch by bloody inch, accepting staggering casualties to defend their city. She spoke of soldiers who, when out of ammunition, charged tanks with nothing but knives, and of snipers who lay motionless in snow for days to make a single kill. "They knew they would die," she concluded, "but they believed each day they held was another day for their countrymen to prepare, another day that freedom might survive." Crane shifted uncomfortably. "What strategic value does such sacrifice serve? Why not retreat, regroup, and attack from a position of strength?" "Sometimes," Lee responded, "the ground itself becomes a symbol. To surrender it would demoralize those fighting elsewhere. The soldiers at Stalingrad died, knowing their sacrifice would inspire others." Before Crane could respond, another human, a dark-skinned man with a prosthetic arm, began speaking. "Let me tell you about a modern Thermopylae," he said. 50 Special Forces operators against an army of thousands. They held a mountain pass while their comrades evacuated civilians. The story he told made Crane's jaw tighten. Humans, outnumbered beyond all reason, choosing certain death to delay an enemy they couldn't hope to defeat. Not for tactical advantage, but for the sake of strangers they would never meet. "What was gained?" Crane finally interrupted. "Your soldiers died. 3,000 civilians lived," came the simple reply. "And those soldiers died, as they had lived, honoring their oath to protect the defenseless." Voss leaned close again. "Captain, their psychological profile is concerning. They appear to genuinely value sacrifice as an end in itself." One by one, the other human delegates shared similar stories spanning their history. Tales of last stands, desperate charges, and soldiers who threw themselves on explosives to save comrades. With each account, Crane felt a growing discomfort. These weren't just diplomatic performances. The humans spoke with authentic reverence for these acts of self-sacrifice. "I have sacrificed for the Empire," Crane found himself saying, "but never fought expecting to die for an idea." Morrison nodded, as if Crane had made a profound observation. "That, Captain, may be the fundamental difference between our species." The meeting continued as a civilian delegation entered, introducing themselves as historians. What followed disoriented Crane's psychological team completely. Detailed accounts of what humans called suicide missions throughout their military history. Soldiers who volunteered for assignments they knew they wouldn't survive. Pilots who crashed their aircraft into enemy ships when their weapons were depleted. "Enough!" Crane finally declared, rising from his seat. "These diplomatic overtures have been educational, but we must proceed to the matter at hand. The Vornax Empire requires Earth's complete surrender and the integration of your military forces under our command." Captain Morrison stood as well, his expression solemn. "And if we refuse? Then we will demonstrate our technological superiority until you reconsider," Crane stated, falling back on the familiar script of conquest. "I see," Morrison replied. "Then I should inform you of Earth's response. We will surrender only when we have given our last sacrifice." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Crane had heard defiance before. It always preceded eventual capitulation. But something in Morrison's tone suggested this wasn't empty bravado. In that moment, Crane realized what troubled him about these humans. Their advanced technology couldn't overcome the weapon of belief they wielded, the willingness to die rather than submit. His mind flashed to the plasma batteries aboard the Iron Dominion, capable of reducing Earth's cities to ash. Yet, what good were such weapons against a species that embraced sacrifice as a virtue? His hand moved instinctively toward the command panel on his wrist, the signal to begin the attack that would demonstrate Vornax's power. But for the first time in 1,000 battles, Artis Crane hesitated. His heart constricted with an unfamiliar sensation. "Captain," Voss prompted, concern evident in her voice. Crane's mind raced. The standard conquest protocol would not work here. These humans wouldn't break under demonstration strikes. They wouldn't surrender to preserve their lives. Every attack would only strengthen their resolve, create more martyrs for their cause. "We are leaving," he announced abruptly. The human delegation exchanged glances, clearly surprised. "The negotiations have concluded," Crane continued, struggling to maintain his authoritative tone. "We will depart this system and leave your species to its own development." As they returned to the shuttle, Voss kept pace with Crane's hurried stride. "Captain, this is unprecedented. The Empire expects successful conquests, not protracted wars against fanatics," Crane snapped. "Record in your psychological assessment. Enemy combatants anonymous but indomitable in spirit." Back aboard the Iron Dominion, Crane composed the briefest report of his career. Terran system, unsuitable for conquest, recommend avoidance. For the first time in 1,000 battles, his reputation would suffer a blemish. Yet the alternative, a war against an enemy that transformed defeat into spiritual victory, seemed suddenly foolish. As the massive warship turned away from Earth, Crane retreated to his private quarters. On his desk lay a copy of Steel and Blood, memoirs of an Earth soldier that intelligence had acquired. He picked it up, wondering what insights it might offer into the species that had, without firing a shot, forced him to retreat. "What have I been fighting for?" he asked the empty room. "Would I die for an ideal?" Meanwhile, on the Empire's central network, a classified bulletin circulated among a select group of officers. A proposal to study the humans' weapon of belief. A new kind of warfare might be necessary for this unique adversary. Artis Crane closed his eyes, a bitter smile crossing his face. The battle has only just begun. The sun was setting over the mountains of Vornax Prime when Captain Artis Crane arrived at the Imperial Military Academy. 6 months had passed since his encounter with Earth, and the summons to address the Academy's graduating class had come as a surprise. His reputation had suffered after the Terran retreat, but apparently, the Imperial High Command still valued his experience. Standing before 500 cadets in gleaming ceremonial armor, Crane felt the weight of his 6 battle scars more heavily than ever before. These young warriors looked at him with the same admiration he had once commanded universally throughout the Empire. They didn't yet understand the report he had filed, the decision that had tarnished his perfect record. 1,000 battles, he began, his voice echoing through the auditorium. That's what the historical records say about my career. 1,000 victories, except the last. A murmur rippled through the cadets. This wasn't the triumphant speech they had expected. You've studied conquest strategies, weapon systems, planetary subjugation protocols, Crane continued. But today, I want to tell you about an enemy that cannot be defeated with any weapon in our arsenal. For the next hour, Captain Crane recounted his meeting with the humans. He described their stories of sacrifice, their willingness to die for abstractions like freedom and honor. As he spoke, he watched confusion spread across the young Vornax faces. They had been raised in a culture where strength determined right, where surrender was the logical choice when facing superior force. But, Captain, one cadet finally asked, why not simply destroy their major cities? Surely they would surrender when faced with extinction. Crane shook his head. That is precisely what I once believed. But these humans, they transform destruction into meaning. Each death becomes a reason for the survivors to fight harder. They call it martyrdom, and it is more powerful than any warship we possess. After the lecture, Lieutenant Commander Voss waited for him in the corridor. 6 months had changed her as well. Her previously pristine gray uniform now bore a single medal, the Imperial Cross for psychological insight. Your speech caused quite a stir, she noted as they walked toward the transport bay. The Academy Commandant looked positively alarmed. Good, Crane replied. They should be alarmed. The Empire has never faced a species like humanity before. Voss lowered her voice. The Special Research Division has been studying the materials we gathered. They believe they can develop countermeasures to this belief weapon. Crane stopped walking, turning to face his second-in-command. What kind of countermeasures? Psychological warfare. Mainly, ways to undermine their propensity for sacrifice, to make them question the values they hold sacred. Voss hesitated. They want you to lead the research team. Crane's face hardened. Is that why I was invited to speak? To evaluate me for this position? Partially, Voss admitted. The High Command is divided on how to approach Earth. Some want to avoid them entirely, as you recommended. Others see their unusual psychology as a challenge to overcome. For a moment, Crane was silent, remembering Captain Morrison's steady gaze. And what do you think, Voss? I think, she said carefully, that studying humans would be valuable regardless of whether we ultimately decide to conquer them. Their concept of sacrifice is illuminating. Later that evening, alone in his temporary quarters at the Academy, Crane opened his personal datapad. He had downloaded more Earth literature since their encounter. Not just military accounts, but poetry, philosophy, religious texts. All seemed to share this peculiar glorification of self-sacrifice. A message alert interrupted his reading. It was from Fleet Admiral Dorn, the highest-ranking officer in the Imperial Navy. Report to Central Command at 0800 hours. Decision made regarding Terran system. Crane barely slept that night. The Imperial Central Command Center was carved into a mountain, its entrance guarded by statues of Vornax warriors from the Empire's founding era. As Crane passed between them, He noted how their expressions, once inspirational to him, now seemed merely arrogant. Admiral Dorn received him in a private chamber, adorned with holographic maps of conquered star systems. The Admiral's age showed in the dullness of his once bright green skin, but his eyes remained sharp. "Captain Crane," he said without preamble, "your report on the humans has caused considerable debate." Crane stood at attention. "I stand by my assessment, Admiral." "As well you should. That's why we've made our decision." The Admiral activated a holographic display showing Earth. "We will not attempt conquest of the Terran system at this time." Relief flooded through Crane, though he maintained his stoic expression. "However," Dorn continued, "we cannot ignore a species with such unusual characteristics. The Psychological Warfare Division believes humans represent both a threat and an opportunity." "In what way, Admiral?" Dorn's expression darkened. "If other species were to adopt this human philosophy of sacrifice, it could make future conquests more costly. Conversely, if we could harness this trait, our own forces might become more formidable." The Admiral handed Crane a data crystal. "Your new assignment. You will command a long-term observation mission. No contact, no interference, just study and analysis. We need to understand these humans before we decide their ultimate fate." Crane accepted the crystal, his mind already racing. "When do I depart?" "In 3 days. The research vessel, Silent Observer, has been prepared. Lieutenant Commander Voss will accompany you, along with a team of our most skilled cultural anthropologists and psychological warfare specialists." As Crane left Central Command, the weight that had settled on him since Earth began to lift slightly. They would not attack. Not yet, at least. But the prospect of studying humans from afar brought a new discomfort. He had spent his career as a warrior, not a scientist, and something about spying on Earth felt dishonorable. The thought startled him. Honor had never been a consideration in conquest before. The Silent Observer was unlike any vessel Crane had previously commanded. Where the Iron Dominion had been a monument to Vornak's military might, this ship was designed for stealth and research. Its hull absorbed rather than reflected light, and its engines were calibrated for minimal energy signatures. The crew was equally unusual. Fewer soldiers, more academics, scientists whose battlefield was the mind rather than physical space. As Crane toured the ship, he found laboratories instead of weapons bays, observation equipment instead of plasma cannons. In the main research center, he found Voss reviewing personnel files. 20 specialists in human psychology, she reported. 10 cultural anthropologists, 5 linguistic experts, and a team dedicated to analyzing their entertainment media. "Entertainment media?" Crane questioned. "Their films, literature, music," Voss explained. "We believe these reveal much about their values, particularly their glorification of sacrifice." Crane nodded slowly. "And our mission parameters? Observation only. We'll position ourselves beyond their detection capabilities and monitor communications, test their responses to manufactured scenarios, and collect data on their decision-making processes." Voss hesitated. "There's something else you should know, Captain." "Go on." "The Psychological Warfare Division has planted operatives on Earth. Vornak's agents, surgically altered to appear human. They've been there for months, gathering intelligence from direct interaction." Crane's jaw tightened. "That wasn't in the mission brief." "It's classified beyond standard access levels. I only learned of it yesterday." Voss lowered her voice. "These agents report that humans are even more complex than our initial assessment suggested. Their willingness to die for causes they believe in is matched by an equal capacity for cruelty toward those they consider enemies." "Fascinating," Crane murmured, though the word inadequately expressed the turmoil in his thoughts. 3 days later, the Silent Observer departed Vornax Prime. As the planet receded behind them, Crane stood on the bridge, contemplating the journey ahead. He had spent his career conquering worlds, breaking civilizations, expanding the empire. Now he was embarking on a mission of observation and study, a warrior transformed into a watcher. The voyage to Earth took 23 days at stealth speed. Upon arrival, the silent observer established orbit around one of Saturn's moons, using the ringed planet as cover, while their sensors reached toward the distant blue sphere that had so confounded Crane. "First data incoming, Captain," reported the science officer. "A thin Vornax with specialized optical implants. We're intercepting their global communications network." The main view screen filled with a cascade of human broadcasts, news reports, entertainment programs, personal communications. The sheer volume was overwhelming. "Filter for military and governmental communications," Crane ordered. The stream narrowed, focusing on more official channels. What emerged was a picture of a species in constant conflict, not just with external threats, but with themselves. Nations opposed nations. Ideologies clashed with ideologies. Yet beneath the chaos, patterns emerged. For weeks, Crane immersed himself in human history and culture. He studied their wars, their heroes, their religions. Every night, he returned to his quarters and recorded his observations, searching for the key to understanding what made humans willing to die for their beliefs. One evening, Voss brought him a particularly interesting report from one of their undercover agents. This operative attended what humans call a funeral, a ceremony for their dead, she explained. It was for a soldier who died preventing a terrorist attack. Crane read the report carefully. The description of the ceremony, the solemn procession, the draped flag, the rifle salute, stirred something in him. They honor their fallen so elaborately. Yes, but notice what the speakers said about the deceased. Voss pointed out. They didn't focus on his achievements or status. They spoke of his sacrifice as if it had meaning beyond the act itself. He died, so others might live. Crane read aloud from the report. A simple concept, yet it seems to hold profound significance for them. Voss nodded. Our psychological team believes this attribution of meaning to death is key to human resilience. They don't just accept casualties. They transform them into symbols that strengthen their resolve. A curious evolutionary adaptation, Crane mused. Most species fight harder when they believe they can survive. Humans fight harder, knowing they might not. As months passed, the silent observer continued its mission, cataloging human behaviors, analyzing their responses to various stimuli. The Psychological Warfare Division conducted remote experiments, manufacturing small crises to observe how humans reacted, testing the limits of their cooperation and sacrifice. Crane found himself increasingly troubled by these experiments. "We're manipulating them," he complained to Voss, after a particularly invasive test involving a fabricated threat to a small coastal community. "That's our mission," she reminded him. "To understand their psychology for the Empire's benefit." "But to what end?" Crane demanded. "Are we still considering conquest, despite everything we've learned?" Voss's expression was unreadable. "That decision remains with High Command. Our duty is to provide them with the information they need." 1 year into the mission, Crane received a secure transmission from Admiral Dorn. The message was brief, but consequential. "Preliminary invasion planning has begun. Prepare comprehensive psychological vulnerability assessment." That night, alone in his quarters, Crane reread Steel and Blood, the human soldier's memoir that had so affected him after their initial encounter with Earth. One passage in particular caught his attention. "We fought, not because we believed we would win, but because some battles must be fought regardless of outcome. To surrender one's principles to avoid suffering is to lose something greater than life itself." The words resonated with something awakening within Crane, a concept alien to traditional Vornax thinking. The idea that some principles transcended survival. The next morning, he called a meeting of the senior research team. "I want a new approach to our assessment," he announced. Instead of focusing on how to break human will, I want to understand what gives it strength." The scientists exchanged confused glances. "Captain," one ventured, "our mission is to identify vulnerabilities, not strengths. To truly understand vulnerabilities, we must comprehend strengths," Crane countered. "What makes humans choose death over submission? What values do they hold dearer than life? Answer these questions, and perhaps we'll discover whether they should be conquered at all." Over the following weeks, Crane directed the research team to examine human philosophies, religions, and ethical systems. They analyzed historical instances where humans had chosen principles over survival, not just in war, but in resistance movements, in scientific advancement, in exploration. 3 months later, Crane submitted his report to Admiral Dorn. It was not the vulnerability assessment the Admiral had requested, but rather a comprehensive analysis titled "The Human Concept of Sacrifice: Implications for Interspecies Relations." The response was swift and severe. Crane was ordered to return to Vornax Prime immediately. His command of the Silent Observer revoked. Voss would complete the mission without him. As he prepared to depart on a small transport vessel, Voss visited his quarters. "You knew this would happen," she said. Not a question, but a statement. "Yes," Crane admitted. "Why risk your career? You're standing in the Empire." Crane considered the question carefully. "Because I've begun to wonder if we've been asking the wrong question. Not, how do we conquer humans, but should we?" Voss's expression softened. "Your report was compelling. The idea that sacrifice for a cause might strengthen, rather than weaken a species, it challenges our fundamental assumptions." "And yet the Empire proceeds with invasion planning," Crane observed bitterly. "Perhaps," Voss said. "But not all in high command agree. Your report has sparked debate. Some argue that humans might be more valuable as allies than subjects." Crane looked up sharply. "Allies? The Empire doesn't have allies. Only conquests and targets." "Things change, Captain," Voss replied. "Even empires evolve." When Crane returned to Vornax Prime, he expected court-martial, possibly even execution for defying orders. Instead, he found himself summoned to a closed session of the Imperial Strategic Council, the highest decision-making body regarding conquest and expansion. The chamber was imposing, its walls lined with holographic displays of the Empire's territory. 12 high-ranking officials sat at a circular table, Admiral Dorn among them. At the center stood a hologram of Earth, rotating slowly. "Captain Artis Crane," announced the council chair. An elderly Vornax whose skin had faded to pale blue with age. "You have submitted a report that contradicts your assigned objective. Explain yourself." Crane stood at attention. "Honored Council, I was tasked with assessing human psychological vulnerabilities. My research led me to conclude that their greatest apparent vulnerability, their willingness to sacrifice themselves for their beliefs, is actually their greatest strength. To proceed with invasion would result in a protracted conflict, unlike any the Empire has faced." Murmurs circulated among the council members. The chair raised a hand for silence. "You exceeded your authority, Captain," Dorn interjected. "Your mission was observation and analysis, not policy recommendation." "With respect, Admiral," Crane replied. "Proper analysis requires context. The context here is that humans represent a unique case in our conquest history." Another council member leaned forward, Director Nix of the Science Division, her eyes sharp with interest. "Elaborate on this uniqueness, Captain." For the next hour, Crane presented his findings on human psychology, their concept of meaningful sacrifice, and their ability to transform defeat into spiritual victory. He showed historical examples of human populations that had endured devastating losses, yet emerged with stronger resolve. "In conclusion," he finished, "conquering Earth would require not just military superiority, but the complete eradication of their capacity to find meaning in resistance, a task I believe is impossible without genocide. Silence fell over the chamber. The council members exchanged glances, some troubled, others skeptical. "What would you recommend instead?" asked the chair. Crane took a deep breath. "Study them. Learn from them. Perhaps even engage with them. Not as conquerors, but as a species with something to offer us." Director Nix's eyes widened. Offer us? What could these primitives possibly offer the Empire? "A different understanding of strength," Crane said simply. "One that transcends mere survival." The debate that followed was heated. Some council members dismissed Crane's assessment entirely, arguing that superior firepower would overcome any psychological resistance. Others were intrigued by the possibility that humans represented a new type of challenge, one that might require new approaches. In the end, the council reached a compromise. Earth would be designated a special observation zone. No conquest would be attempted for 50 years, during which time the Empire would study human development and reassess periodically. As Crane left the council chamber, Admiral Dorn fell into step beside him. "You've damaged your career. You realize you'll never command a conquest fleet again." "I understand, Admiral." "However," Dorn continued, "the council was impressed by your insights, if not your insubordination. They've created a new position, cultural integration strategist, and recommended you for it." Crane stopped walking. "What would this entail?" "Studying species before conquest to determine the most effective approach. In some cases, recommending alternatives to traditional subjugation." Dorn's expression was unreadable. "It seems your perspective has opened a new strategic direction for the Empire." 6 months later, Crane stood on the observation deck of a different vessel, the Cultural Envoy, a ship designed not for war, but for research and diplomatic missions. Through the viewport, Earth was visible as a distant blue dot. Lieutenant Commander Voss joined him, now serving as his chief advisor in his new role. "The humans have detected our presence," she reported. "Their space agencies are speculating about the mysterious object near Jupiter." "Let them speculate," Crane replied. "We're not here to hide anymore." "The Council has approved limited contact," Voss reminded him. "A signal containing basic mathematical sequences as a first step." Crane nodded, his eyes still fixed on the distant planet. "1,000 battles," he murmured. 1,000 victories. And yet it took a retreat to teach me the most important lesson of all." "Which is?" Voss asked. "That true strength lies not in the ability to conquer, but in understanding what is worth fighting for." Crane turned to face her. "These humans, they know what's worth dying for. Perhaps they can teach us what's worth living for as well." As the Cultural Envoy prepared to transmit humanity's first official contact with alien life, Artis Crane, once the Empire's greatest conqueror, felt something he had never experienced in 1,000 battles. Hope. Not for victory, but for understanding. Not for conquest, but for connection. The battle, indeed, had only just begun, but it was a battle of ideas, not weapons. And in this arena, perhaps both species could emerge victorious. The end.